Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. You guys know what time it is. Time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And one of my subscribers has awared me of a video that Jeff Cavalier did, aka Athlean-X, aka Curl-Lean-X, aka Bro-Lean-X, talking about how he has lost an inch of his arms. Let me put on my +5 out of speechcraft. Let's talk about this. And that's the thing, guys. Jeff is really clever at marketing the fear of loss tactic. Now, for those of you who know anything about marketing, you know that term, and you realize that's what he does. This is killing your gains. Now, is that clickbait? Yes. Does it work? Yes. Does it help to make him a millionaire? Yes. So, I'm not going to necessarily knock the hustle, but that's what he does. It's that fear of loss tactic. Now, I started watching the video, and at first, I thought the video was going to go a certain way, and it went in the opposite direction, and I was actually pleased to see that. I'm not going to be that critical of this video, because every time I thought he was going to say something, I was going to disagree with and be like, Jeff, why are you coming up with this bullshit? He ended up saying stuff that's technically correct, that I'm not going to disagree with. Now, at first, I thought he was going to talk about his biceps, because again, you come over to the point of when Jeff is worried about his biceps, that's a problem. His biceps are the most developed muscle in his entire body. Jeff, from a strength perspective or even an aesthetics perspective, because he seems to care about aesthetics, he markets aesthetics while pretending to market strength. He doesn't really market strength science, and he doesn't market strength very well, but he markets aesthetics under the guise of strength. So, it's kind of like, Jeff, you're all biceps. Aesthetically speaking, your biceps could lose an inch and everything else on your body could grow and you would still be proportionate. And he's kind of like, he mentioned the body dysmorphia, just kind of joke there. But then what came around is that he wasn't talking about his biceps. So it's like, well, I digress. In fact, he went on to say that, realistically, your triceps are actually a bigger muscle than your biceps. And I always tell people they need to focus on their triceps, specifically their long head, if they want bigger arms. Well, he's got a point. He's not wrong. So he started talking about triceps. And one of the things he mentioned straight up front, he started talking about his shoulder injury. He's torn a labrum. Sorry, I almost said a labia. He almost tore his labia. But he mentioned his labrum tear and how that affects shoulder extensions. Like, well, here's where we go. Because here's one of the things he pointed out. Stuff that you guys need to know. If you're like me and you don't have the best arm genetics in the world, because I think we can say a lot of things about me, good and bad, but I think we could honestly say I don't have particularly good arm genetics. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that point. Everyone who's seen me will say, yeah, your arms could stand to grow. It's not like I don't train them, and it's not like I don't know how to train them. It's the genetic luck of the draw there. I'm not gifted there. But hey, by that same token, people be like, what do you do for your calves? I'm like, I was born. Like, I don't train my calves. I like to be able to wear cowboy boots. I like to be able to wear a gun in one of my cowboy boots sometimes. If I were to train my calves, I couldn't physically fit that stuff. I don't need them bigger than about 18 inches, right? And they just sit there if I don't train them at all. So, we all get a nice mix in our genetics. We have good things and bad things. Now, in my case, I have terrible arm genetics. A whole hell of a lot of you out there do too. So knowing what Jeff kind of pointed out, there's a lot more going on to the arm than shoulder flexion and extension, elbow flexion and extension, right? A lot of guys think in those terms, yeah, this works your tricep, this works your bicep. But shoulder rotation, shoulder extension and rotation and flexion, those things matter. They affect muscles in your arms because you have multiple insertion points going on there. And he kind of pointed out, because of one of the attachment points where the long head attaches back here, the long head is affected by shoulder extension. It is affected by it, more so than the other two heads. And in fact, if you technically want to recruit all the fibers in the long head, which is the bigger head back here, it's the biggest one of the three, if you want to recruit all the available muscle fibers in it, you're going to have to technically do that movement. You're going to have to, because it's part of the function of the muscle. So if you really wanted to maximize the development of that muscle, you're going to need to do that to some extent. And he is right. He is right. I'm not saying that you should necessarily focus on it a lot, because there are other big compound movements that can still work that. Things like weighted dips, right? Weighted dips, overhead pressing. Those things work that head also. But if you're going to do a smaller movement, you've got to think in those terms. Now, I think he went a little overboard with that, because I don't think it's necessary to do it as extreme as he did. And I don't think it's necessary to keep it back here. In other words, he was showing when he was showing them that, he's like, don't come all the way to 90 degrees. That doesn't matter. And that's one of the few things where I'm going to disagree with what he said in the video, because that's the only point that I think he got wrong. He started doing that because a lot of bodybuilders want to talk about continual tension. Well, if we're going to talk about science, say put the science back into strength, there is no scientific basis for the continual tension hypothesis. It's not based on science. It's not based on physiology. It's based on bodybuilder bro lore. It's based on pump workouts and guys who pen insulin after a pump workout. Well, if you're not abusing large amounts of drugs, I wouldn't worry a whole hell of a lot about the way bodybuilders pump train. Not particularly important. And when it comes to biomechanics and everything else, continual tension doesn't matter. Does tension matter? Yeah. Does the total amount of tension that you subject that muscle to, how much work you subject it to, the range of motion, again, tension meaning the mechanical tension, the weight on it, the volume, does all that stuff matter? You bet it does. But does the actual continual tension matter? Nope. Doesn't matter at all. Doesn't seem to at all. There's no scientific basis for that hypothesis. And it's never even been a factor when things are looked at when maximum growth is achieved in a lab. Not even a factor. So I feel like that one point was a little bit silly, but the fact that you need some stretch there, and I don't think you even have to exaggerate it as much as he did to recruit that part of the tricep, is not necessary, but it could be beneficial. But his point is valid. That does help work the tricep, the long head, and that is the biggest head. And if you want to maximally develop the biggest head on the biggest muscle on your arm, doing some of that is probably a good idea. But he noted that because of his tear, that he has not been able to do it for a while. He's had to let it heal, and that he feels like his arms have shrunk accordingly, that they've shrunk accordingly. And he also pointed out that the only thing he could think of to do that might have helped would have been, to do dumbbells instead of the skull crushers with the easy curl bar, and maybe all the way to supinate the hands. But then he pointed out that you reduce tension on the muscle by reducing weight. And that's always an interesting point, because a lot of times you'll see bodybuilders say stuff like, reduce the weight down to do this or that if it makes it harder. If it makes it harder because the muscle has to work harder, that's fine. But in the case of that supinated grip, the actual moment arms involved in the triceps are the same, but you're forced to use a lighter weight due to grip, due to things going on with your hands, everything else. So in that case, it actually does generate less mechanical tension on the tricep. You're not really getting the benefit of it. Now, is because of the rotation of the shoulder that happens, that changes the internal versus external rotation in the shoulder joint. Would have been easier on his injury? Yes. But because of the reduced tension, would it have been enough to give the desired effect? Probably not. Probably not. But there is something to be said for people who do have a lot of problems with their elbows from doing skull crushers, even with an easy curl bar, of doing dumbbells, even with a pronated grip like this, a hammer grip. That can be a solution. That's usually a last resort that I find for people who want to do some smaller movements for triceps, who struggle historically with tendonitis in their elbows. That can be a viable fix. But in this case of what he was trying to do, it would have to be more extreme to take that pressure off the shoulder joint so that he could let it heal. And he felt like it just wasn't worth it to him. He thought about it, but it wasn't worth it because the loss of tension would be so extreme that he probably wouldn't get the training effect that he wanted, and he thought he would just let it heal. And now he said he's going to go back, work on it some more, and fix that. But that's a couple of good points that he made there. Is that understanding that, number one, guys who really want to get their arms as jacked as possible, putting some effort into the long head, which is going to involve extension of the shoulder, is going to be required, unless you're just really, really genetically gifted. Again, assuming that chasing maximum arm size is your goal anyways. That is going to be necessary, and that in certain cases you do have to think in terms of tension. In other words, if you're picking an exercise that forces you to use less weight, not because the muscle works harder, but because it puts you at an awkward angle to where you just simply can't put as much tension on the muscles you're trying to work, it may not give you the hypertrophic effect that you want. Because at the end of the day, people have to remember that muscle size is a product of total tension that you subject the muscle to. And that includes a combination of mechanical tension and metabolic stress on it. And if you're forced to use a variation of an exercise that forces you to use such a light weight that you can't really work the muscle effectively, it really is just a waste of an exercise. It's really not worth doing. So he brought up a couple good points there, and I do like the fact that he did bring around for a lot of people of understanding that even muscles like your biceps, there's more than one joint involved. There's more than one joint involved. And that's what I always tell people when they ask me, hey, you seem to be doing direct arm work. You're not a big fan of isolation movements. And it's like, well, I'm not doing isolation movements for them either. I'm doing them as a multi-joint exercise. In other words, there is shoulder movement happening with both my tricep extensions and my curls. Why? Because those muscles require that to be fully worked. And that's what people need to remember. Most of the muscles in the body probably cannot be maximally developed off of a single joint exercise. And that's just the reality of it. There are a few exceptions, with the majority of them can't be. They simply have more than one function going on. And if you're one of those people who you're not particularly genetically gifted in the arms and you want big arms, you're going to have to be very aware of that fact. All right, guys, well, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.